I wouldn't say, I'm like, did I coin myself a light worker when I was in New Age? I think depending on where you read and who you speak to, it can actually have slight differentiations in terms of how it's described. And he actually coined the phrase, I think they say somewhere around the 70s. I kept hearing Lightworkers talk about the 144,000. Now, the 144,000 we know are God's chosen people, which is spoke about in end times. So I just want to read you a verse in Revelation that relates to this and how I don't feel like it's anything to do with light workers. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with the 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000. See that? Hey guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you are all blessed. So I just wanted to touch on the subject of light workers, because this is a very popular term that I've seen going around today, and it was actually just quite interesting to research, because I kind of knew a little bit about the concept, but I didn't actually know loads about the history before I really started to research this. I might have done. I didn't like specifically advertise it as far as I remember, but I may have been in agreement with that. And I definitely had used the term light worker when I was in New Age. And I just really wanted to do a bit of a video on this because, again, you can kind of see how this deviates away from God. I definitely believe it's incorporated with New Age. Excuse me, looking rough today. I literally just got back from the gym. But I wanted to get this video filmed because it was fresh on my mind from the research that I've done. So yeah, I just took a few notes just to go over a little bit about what the term light worker means and where it comes from, and how I do feel like it deviates away from God and does come into the category of like New Age and spirituality type stuff. So the term light worker isn't actually defined that well at all, and I think depending on where you read and who you speak to, it can actually have slight differentiations in terms of how it's described. So one of the descriptions that I picked up from a website was, it's a conscious decision to endeavor to answer the call of source, light over fear. So that was, and a lot of ones that I'd read also were very like similar and very much along those lines. There was also someone that was describing it as a worker of God sharing light. And there is some sources where you will see God encompassed in that. And I'm going to read an article that I've read and how that's encompassed into it. And again, it doesn't sound very much of God to me. And again, I think when we compare this to scripture and what isn't written, it starts to make me question it quite a lot. So yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit more about this. Again, this isn't to judge people that are in New Age or necessarily to judge people that use this term. You know, I'm sure that a lot of people's intentions are very, very good that do this. And like I said, I know for a fact when I was in New Age, like my intentions weren't bad at all. I was just deceived. So I'm not saying by any means this video is not to put down people, because again, there's a lot of genuine people that I'm sure use this term, but I just want to share a little bit more truth on where it's really coming from and how this is kind of more deception from Satan. So if you are interested in hearing more, keep listening. So if you do a Google book search, I think the earliest sort of findings that come up in terms of the word light worker are around a lady called Patricia, and apologies if I pronounce her last name wrong, Cuta-Robles. It was called The Next Step, and I think that was in 1989, and that sort of described a light worker. Again, I can't find a lot of older stuff that really use this term. I do think a lot of New Age terms are quite new concepts as well, but again, they come from kind of old ideas and the same source, as we know. There was also a guy called Michael Meerdad, if I pronounced that correctly, and he actually coined the phrase, I think they say somewhere around the 70s. He was actually a spiritual and metaphysical teacher. So again, I query a little bit into what his beliefs really stood for. You will also find the word light worker often linked to like the healing arts. You'll also see that's a very interlinked thing, and you'll see a lot of people in the healing arts terming themselves light workers or using that concept. And a lot of places also describe it as, they put God, goodness, or love. Now they're three very different things. Again, I think they're just coining God into, I think they're making a version of God of their own. It's not the biblical God that they're talking about here, and I want to explain a little bit more about why that is. the way they interchange the word God with things as well was a bit of a red flag for me. And again, I'm not saying that every single person would do that exact way, but I had seen that come up quite a lot in my research, so I thought that was an interesting thing to point out. And also when you look at books that are written about light workers, I'm going to put a clip in here. Like, to me, again, that looked a little bit satanic and new agey, so it was another thing that made me query it a little bit. And another thing that really sealed it for me was when you research the term lightworker was the name Doreen Virtue, and I've spoken about her in many videos. Thankfully, she was saved. Praise God. She was saved from New Age. She was one of the most famous writers in terms of she had angel cards and books. And, you know, she was very, very popular. Most people in New Age would have heard of her. And obviously, she realized what she was in was deception. She repented and she gives her life to God. She now stopped selling all this stuff. She burnt all her cards. And she does a lot of videos talking out against it now. Praise God. And that's another thing that made me realize, because you'll see some people say, oh, it's not to do with New Age. And again, I just, maybe originally, possibly not, but it's definitely incorporated into that same type of concept today. And I think you can see the mindsets are very similar. And her book back then was called Lightworkers, The Lightworkers Way, sorry. And again, she's repented from all that. And I think just showing that when you're into that kind of thing, when you're doing things like angel cards and, you know, you're involved in all that kind of stuff, the light worker term's definitely mixed up in that. And you can tell that from these famous writers. And that was another red flag for me that made me realize, okay, yeah, this is definitely something that's not of God. So I just wanted to read you a couple of passages for some popular sites that came up about light workers. And again, so we can compare this kind of scripturally. So this is the galactic history of lightworkers. No idea what that means. The birth of the soul. Lightworkers' souls were born long before the earth and humanity came into being. Again, does not sound very godly. That to me sounds a little bit like touching on Hindu concepts, very slightly, in terms of like, not reincarnation, but it reminds me of that sort of thing. Like souls are birthed in waves. There is a sense in which souls are eternal with no beginning, no end. Well, we know that when we die, obviously our soul does continue to go on. We know that it's true. But in another sense, they are born at some point. It is at this point that their consciousness reaches a sense of individual self. This all sounds very New Agey. Before this point, they are already there as a possibility. However, there is no consciousness yet of me and other. Again, I don't see any mention of God, our creator, in that. The consciousness of me arises, again, seems very me. A lot of these New Age concepts are. And again, that goes back to the same line in the Garden of Eden where Satan was telling Eve, like, you can become like God. You know, it's all to do with me, and I can do this, and I can become this. And, you know, we're not doing things through God, through Yeshua. This is the problem. So they say the consciousness of me arises when somehow a demarcation line is drawn between two groups of energy. This is what I'm saying, man. Like, this is going very, very New Agey. When you hear too much energy, I've said this before, the word energy in the occult often turns to spirit. We have to be a bit careful of how we're terming that. Another thing that I wanted to read as well that was similar to this is the distinct difference between lightworkers and all other people on the spiritual path is that people on the spiritual path might be very casual about their personal work or their spiritual development. In fact, most people around them might not be aware that the person is even on the spiritual path. But lightworkers are not casual at all about their spiritual work. Instead, they have a strong dedication to their awakening, again, very New Agey term, and feel a calling to make a difference in lives of others. Again, I don't see any mention of doing God's will or God's work here. It's not that a lightworker is pushy about their spiritual path, but they are keenly aware that they want to make a difference. Again, I'm not saying these are bad people by any means. I'm just saying that I'm not coming for individuals. I'm coming for the concept. It says, this is where it gets a bit sticky, and that creator purpose in part of a divine plan for the awakening of humanity. Again, very New Agey terminology. It says, yes, we're all created from the light of God. I wonder what their term of God means, because it's not the biblical God. So I don't know what they're meaning when they say God, but it's not the biblical God. But not all of us access that light and use it to illuminate the world around us. Those of us who shine our light as part of our soul's purpose, we are light workers. It says we are part of a divine hierarchy of light that emanates from God itself and shines onto the earth, passing through all other dimensions. Again, very new agey, using the word dimensions and talking about dimensions. And this is the bit where I was like, It says, these include, it says, light workers doing a similar service to humanity relative to their dimension. Again, all this dimension talk, as soon as you see that, I think red flag. This includes, and they put the Christ. This includes the Christ, Mother Mary, angels, ascended masters, intergalactic light beings from other star systems. Sorry, shouldn't laugh. Such as Cyrus, Acritus, I can't even say that, and Andromeda, whoever that is, the great brotherhood, sisterhood of light. Right, okay. This is my issue. So for me, when they talk of Christ, I think they're confusing it with Christ consciousness, which again is, there's a really good debunking video on Christ consciousness on Stephen Bankard's video. That is complete deception from the devil. But understand when they're saying, how are you branding Christ in with angels, ascended masters, and intergalactic beings, which, by the way, do not exist. Intergalactic beings, aliens, aka fallen angels. That's what, again, aliens are just fallen angels. You can see that biblically. And I'm going to put some scripture in after this as well that speaks about this. Ascended masters, again, very strange concept. We have no connection, obviously, with these ascended masters or anything. Intergalactic beings often are fallen angels. And again, the fact that light workers are categorized themselves in similar work as basically fallen angels, aka intergalactic beings, should be another red flag. This is all branded in together, which is completely blasphemous to me. And again, it all comes back to concepts that don't exist. Talking about ascended masters and all these kind of things. This is completely leaving out God. Their version of when they talk about God is not the same version of ours. I have a feeling it's probably similar to what I believed when I just thought of God as a higher consciousness. That's the type of vibe. And now I'm not speaking directly for whoever wrote this because I don't know them, but that's the kind of vibe that I get from that. And I really think it's quite easy to discern when you read that this is not of God. I don't think it takes a lot of discernment to see that. It's just, that's a little concerning for me. Another thing that, again, I find very interesting with a connection with this is when they use the term Lightbearer. You see that come up quite a lot in terms of when you're researching light workers. It often comes up with Lightbearer. Now, one thing to be very aware of, particularly in the KJV version, the original Hebrew word, meaning shining one, light bearer, is actually given the English translation to Lucifer. So when I started to keep hearing this light worker, light term, as soon as I heard that, immediately the word Lucifer popped up into my head. And this is before I started really researching into the connection between how Lucifer spoke about biblically and how it spoke about in terms of light worker. And just something rang a bell in my head, and I was like, that really sounds like Lucifer coming as an angel of light and this deception and everything looking good. Kind of what you do, kind of what you see when you see certain people do certain meditations or psychedelics. And it really made me think that term Lightbearer. I immediately realized that related to Lucifer. And I thought, hold on a sec, this is just more proof that this is deception. Another thing that made me realize this is a major deception from Satan. And it's just another thing to show that, again, it's the same lie they said in the Garden of Eden. So when we're reading Genesis, and I'll read out this verse, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God. This is what Satan goes to tell Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now, to me, when we're doing a lot of this new age stuff, again, it's like gaining this enlightenment, because a lot of it comes from not all of it, but a lot of it comes from Buddhist and Hindu concepts of gaining this level of enlightenment. And again, to me, it's the same deception of becoming like God, and you can have this and you can have that. And I think that verse just shows that it's relating to the same thing, because when we're saying that, we're becoming a light bearer, we're a light worker, it's that same concept, it's that same lie. So another thing when they talk about intergalactic beings, and I always say I don't believe in aliens, I don't believe in intergalactic beings, which AK would be the same thing there. I believe them to be a fallen angel. And I think one verse that I kind of really relate to that is in Isaiah, and it says they come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens. So I believe when they're talking about this distant land, then we're not talking about a different, I don't describe it as a different dimension, because I think we've got to be a bit careful in terms of our terminology. I describe that in the heavens above the firmament. And again, it says they come from a distant land, from the ends of the heavens. So I relate that to being the heavens. This is what I think they describe as intergalactic beings. The Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. So I believe that that's exactly what they're saying and biblically when they talk about the fallen angels. And I believe that the deception within this is when they talk about these things is the same thing. And they talk about a lot of this on that Gaia channel, if that's how you pronounce it, which is definitely deception. You can fully well know if that's truth. That channel would not be that publicized. But yeah, so I think, again, it's understanding that there's only two sources. It's either coming from God or it's coming from the devil. There is either two sources. And when you look at this spiritual type stuff, you can very much tell that they're not talking about the biblical God. And I just think it's very interesting. And this is why I think, because obviously we can be defiled by what comes out of our mouth. And that's something I'm definitely working on because I need to. But this is why I think, again, we got to be careful with what terms we're using, because this is taking out God. And this is, again, we're going on Satan's terminology is what I would call it. And this is what we need to be a little bit careful of, because it's deception. I know the English language is pagan anyway, but, you know, which is difficult. But obviously there'll be some leeway in terms of that, because, you know, to some degree, there's only so much you can do with that. But I think we need to be very careful in using these very new agey terms. Like I've even really tried to stop myself recently saying the word energy, you know. But yeah, I mean, it's not easy, but I just think it's a really good thing to think about. Another thing that I found quite crazy was when I kept hearing Lightworkers talk about the 144,000. Now, the 144,000 we know are God's chosen people, which is spoke about in end times. So I just want to read you a verse in Revelation that relates to this and how I don't feel like it's anything to do with Lightworkers. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with the 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000. See, they're talking about a human figure here. We're not talking about a frequency. Who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. These who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, these have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. So the main bit I wanted to talk about was even particularly the first line when they talk about the 144,000 are God's chosen people, and you can tell that they're talking about human flesh when they're saying this. Now, a lot of the things in New Age and like light workers are describing the 144,000 as either light workers or it's a frequency. But when you look biblically, you can tell it's definitely not a frequency. Again, that is definitely a New Age concept. These are God's chosen people. And I think, again, more deception from the devil trying to make it out like it's something it's not, because he knows the importance of the 144,000, very much so. So yeah, I just think it's really something to be aware of. Again, this video isn't to judge anyone that's in it by any means. Always happy to discuss this with people. I was in this for many, many, many years. It's just to kind of put a seed for thought out there, and just to put some education out there about where some of this stuff comes from and how it relates biblically. Because again, the deception is large, and I've always said, again, the truth is learnt, never told. So please do your own research. Please look up some of this stuff, and please make reference biblically as well. And really pray and discern over before you start doing these things, because we don't know the detrimental effect this is going to have on us spiritually, and how we're going to be judged for that on Judgment Day. But yeah, so I really, really hope that helps some people. I hope it gives a bit more insight into that. And yeah, I hope to see you guys in my next video. Blessings to you all. And if you do watch this, make sure, or you do study, make sure you cover yourself with the blood. Blessings.